Welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Ahmed Shorai. I'm the chairman and CEO of Global Media Holding and a board member at the Atlantic Council, and I'm delighted to introduce this important event today. As we approach the second year anniversary of the historic Abraham Accords, it's important to recognize just how significant this moment really is. 2 years exactly on September 15, 2020, leaders from the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Israel signed the Abraham Accord. A few months later, on December 10, Israel and Morocco also signed a normalization agreement. Today, 2 years after the Accord and normalization agreement were signed, the benefits continue to grow. The Accord have generated a period of strengthened diplomatic cooperation, regional trade and tourism, infrastructure investment, and scientific exchange between participating countries. But one of the most important outcomes of the Abraham Accords, in my view, is the change in people-to-people relationships between the signatory countries. This last 2 years has seen a blossoming of bilateral initiatives within the private sector and civil society. Bilateral trade between Morocco and Israel has risen to $117 million in August 2020, with goals to reach $250 million by next year. Likewise, more than 200,000 Israeli tourists are expected to travel to Morocco this year, a fourfold increase since the accord were signed 2 years ago. Relations are also progressing in the realm of security cooperation. In November of last year, Israel and Morocco signed a memo on military cooperation, joint training exercises, and intelligence sharing. Since 2020, Israel has also participated in African Line 2022 military exercises organized by Morocco and the United States and sent a number of high-level military officials to Morocco. Today, we are delighted to have with us officials from Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, who will build on this conversation and address both the impact of the Abraham Accord in transforming the region and the opportunities they present to deepen regional integration and generate greater prospect for peace and prosperity in the Middle East. I will now hand things over to the event moderator, the Atlantic Council Distinguished Fellow Ambassador Daniel Shapiro, and non-resident Senior Fellow Carmel Irvitz. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome everybody. It's our pleasure to host so many friends of the Atlantic Council to mark the second anniversary of the Abraham Accords. We're grateful for the support of Dr. Ahmed Shorai and for bringing the perspective of Morocco, not one of the original signatories, but an important part of this story. But to really mark this occasion appropriately, we are very honored and pleased to be joined by ambassadors of the three countries that really launched this historic process in September of 2020. We are joined today by His Excellency Sheikh Abdullah bin Rashid Al Khalifa, the ambassador of the Kingdom of Bahrain to the United States. I'm not going to tell all of the bios of all of our distinguished guests because that would just take the entire time, but he served in numerous posts in the government of Bahrain in education and culture and sports, as a governor of Bahrain's Southern Government, and since 2017 has very ably represented Bahrain in Washington, D.C. We're also joined by our good friend, Ambassador Yusuf Al Otaiba, the ambassador of the United Arab Emirates to the United States. Ambassador Al Otaiba has served in that position since 2008 with numerous accomplishments in the bilateral relationship between the United States and the UAE that he is deeply responsible for. And obviously, as everyone knows, was a key player in the normalization agreements of 2020. He has served since 2017 concurrently as the UAE Minister of State, recognizing his key relationship as an advisor to now President of the UAE, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. And we are joined for the first time by the Israeli ambassador to the United Arab Emirates, the first Israeli ambassador to the United Arab Emirates, Amir Hayek. This is a great honor for us. Ambassador Hayek has served in numerous positions in government, specializing in trade and economic matters, but also brings the perspective of a private sector business person who has also risen to high positions in private sector companies and trade associations in Israel, and really has a key role in the rapidly developing and expanding trade relationship between Israel and the UAE. Gentlemen, we're delighted to have all of you with us, and we know this is going to be a rich conversation, not only marking what occurred 2 years ago this month, but more importantly, looking forward to how the region is transforming since then and going into the future. To lead this moderated conversation, I'm going to turn to my colleague, Carmiel Arbit, a non-resident senior fellow for Middle East programs at the Atlantic Council. Carmiel, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you again to all of the ambassadors for joining us today. I want to dive right in and maybe start with a look back before we look forward, and turn to you, Ambassador Hayek. You've been now in the UAE for almost a year. I would love for you to reflect on that time a bit, to tell us a bit about what surprised you, but also to then kind of take a step back and look at how over the last 2 years, the geopolitical relations between Israel and its neighbors has transformed as a result of these agreements, and how you're seeing that play out on the ground. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Abraham Accords was not just an agreement and not was just a declaration. It's a game changer in the Middle East. It's the first time that we are working as a regional group. It's the first time that we are thinking as a regional group. It can turn the Middle East into a very strong strategic and economic unified region. It can turn the Middle East upside down, actually, and change the game. Let me tell you a little bit about Israel-UAE relations, and it might help you to understand the picture. I'm here 11 months and in Abu Dhabi, and in those 11 months, I had 2 visits of our president, 2 visits of our prime minister, 20 visits of ministers from Israel. We signed around 20 agreements, including the CEPA, Free Trade Agreement between Israel and the UAE. We are going to establish a joint bilateral R&D fund of $100 million to bring more Israeli technology for collaboration with Emirati companies. We built literally a new embassy. We are building literally a new consulate. We are building teams. And actually, I'm feeling like running a startup that will be a unicorn. About the relations with the UAE, I can tell that it's a marathon. We are looking at it as a marathon and not 200-meter sprint. It's a feeling that 2 cousins that didn't meet for 50 years, and they just want to catch up and tell and do things together, and it's a beautiful feeling. It's a 2-year-old baby that already knows how to speak 3 languages. Now, talking about numbers, and I came from the private sector, so numbers, it's my bread and butter. Let's talk about trade numbers. Well, we reached to $1.407 billion in the first 7 months of 2022. And I'm talking about comparing to 1.221 billion all 2021. And I'm talking only about trade, not security, not software, not tourism, just trade, pure trade. And the United Arab Emirates is now ranking number 19 in the bilateral trade with Israel out of 126 companies. I can assure you that till the end of this year, will be around number 15, 16. And in 2 to 3 years, the UAE will be one of the top 10 countries that Israel is trading with. We saw around 450,000 tourists, Israeli tourists, coming to the UAE. And it's just the beginning. So from this picture, I can tell you that we are running forward. We started very fast, and we're just going to increase our efforts to bring those 2 great countries together. And this is only an example with Israel and the UAE. We are running forward with the relations with Morocco, with Bahrain. We are improving our relations and bilateral economic relations with Jordan and Egypt, which are very important. And I'm sure that this is only the beginning.
Excellent. Thank you. I want to pick up on something that you mentioned, which was the free trade agreement, and kick this over to you, Ambassador Al-Otaiba. You, of course, were at the forefront of making these agreements a reality and also in driving this FTA. I wonder if you might reflect a bit on how the accords have met, exceeded, or perhaps failed your expectations coming into them, and to talk about what your ambitions are for these agreements moving forward, including what you hope to get out of the free trade agreement.
Thank you, Carmi. It's great to be with you guys. Thank you for having me. I didn't have much expectations, honestly, of the agreement. I thought it was just, an agreement that we were negotiating in real time, and we wanted to avoid annexation, and we wanted to kind of avoid what I thought was going to be a disaster for the region. So I didn't know there were going to be 450,000 tourists. I didn't know that the Israeli Pavilion at Expo was going to welcome 3 million. So from a numbers perspective, it's definitely exceeded my expectations. And I think exceeded most Emiratis' expectations. I think the future is more collaboration. I think it's less about ideology, less about politics, more about business and trade and investment, more about people to people. I think the success of any relationship, whether it's two countries, two friends, or two spouses, I think it's about understanding, it's about communication, it's about being honest, about being direct. We have a great relationship with Israel. Now, this is the second Israeli government we've worked with in just 2 years. But it doesn't mean that we agree on everything. It means that we are having an open channel and we talk and we discuss things. So I think the future, if we focus on the economic piece and how to improve lives, how to improve stability, how to improve prosperity, I think we're on our way. And some of it is going to happen in a bilateral lane, like the SEPA, the free trade agreement that Amir mentioned. And some of it could happen in a more multilateral framework like the Negev Forum. And so I think we just have to keep pushing. I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues in the White House, and I presented him the text of the SEPA. And I said, we and the Israelis negotiated this in about 4 months, maybe 5. Why doesn't the US consider signing on to it? And then eventually we talk about an Abrahamic free trade zone. Why don't we finish the prosperity project between Jordan and Israel? Because that is a classic win-win-win project that couldn't have been done before the Abraham Accords. So I would encourage us and even challenge us to think a bit more out of the box and be a little more unconventional in our thinking and how to do things. I'm not a big fan of the response that, well, this is why we can't do this, or we've never done this before. If we thought like that, Carmi, the Abraham Accords would have never happened. Sometimes you have to think out of the box and you have to push the envelope a little bit, but it has to be done in a way where everyone benefits. And so I think the future involves more collaboration, both bilaterally and multilaterally, but we also need to think differently. We need to think about things that we never thought of before, just like the way the Abraham Accords came together.
Excellent. Thank you. Ambassador Khalifa, I'll turn to you now. Since 2020, we've seen relations between Bahrain and Israel ramp up, including the signing of a historic defense agreement. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that agreement, but also reflect on why economic exchanges and tourism haven't necessarily been at the same pace as some of your neighbors. But before you answer any question, you have to tell us what everyone looking at this screen is wondering, which is, where are you? What is this incredible backdrop behind you?
Thank you, Camille. Thank you for having me here. Amongst those that know the region and those that really worked hard to bring the Abraham Accords together. I'm actually at a synagogue, Park Avenue Synagogue in New York. There's an off-the-record conversation that AIPAC has organized with the Northeast Rabbinic Forum. But who would have imagined for me to be here to talk about the Accords 2 years ago? I mean, things are moving very quickly, and they're becoming more normal as time goes by. But going back to your question, I think that trade has significantly increased given the size of the economy in Bahrain. What we've seen is not in the billions of dollars, but in the millions, which to us is a step forward. We always knew that we need to rely on the private sector to engage more, but the government has been really leaning forward to make ends come together. And what we're seeing now is a significant increase in trade. And I mean, last year it was 6.5 million, but within the first 6 months, we're seeing a $5 million trade value between the two countries. One of the biggest exports has obviously been aluminum, given Bahrain's work in this field and knowing that we have one of the biggest smelters in the world. But I think that as time goes by, we'll see those numbers ramping up in comparison to the region because of the smaller ecosystem that we have in Bahrain. We always have to keep that in mind, and we have to always look forward to economic opportunities. But the biggest kind of, we signed over 40 MOUs, but one of the biggest MOUs that has an impact not only on the bilateral relations, but also on the multilaterally is the defense agreement. Bahrain has been host of the Fifth Fleet for years. What that agreement has done now is it has put an IDF officer in Bahrain working alongside representatives that have and those that still do not have relations with Israel. And I think that's the value of what we're trying to do when it comes to defense relations. Obviously, the region sometimes goes through volatile stages, and in order for any community to thrive, the fundamental element is security. And we're seeing that through bilateral agreements like these and their effects on a multilateral level.
Excellent. I wonder if we might look to some of the processes that have already started percolating to strengthen the Abraham Accords moving forward, starting with the Negev Forum. I wonder if you might reflect, and Ambassador Hayek, I'll start with you, but I would ask the other ambassadors to chime in as well. How are these plans moving forward? What is the Negev Forum's role in deepening integration between these countries? Do you believe there will be tangible projects and initiatives that will come out of this? Ambassador Hayek, I'll start with you.
I'll start from the end of your question. Yes, I believe, but we need to do some things in order to make it happen. The Negev Forum, for the first time, foreign ministers from five countries plus the UK, of course, gathered in order to talk and to take actions in order to make this region a better region and to deal with the regional challenges that we are facing. We will love, of course, to see Jordan joining, and another step. That's another step to make this region better and to work together in order to think together as a region. This forum can lead regional projects on regional projects or bilateral projects. That's good for the region that can make impact. And I'm talking about food security, agro technology, water, which is very important. And Ambassador Luteba mentioned the projects that we are having with Jordan. And I think that this is one of the crucial projects and we need to push it forward. Energy, health, telemedicine, education, transportation. By moving forward, we must think about the youth as well, and how can we integrate them into this process. And we as governments, in order to make it happen, must integrate the private sector in order to be able to implement it. And we must bring them to the table sooner than later. I think that the private sector can play a very important role in pushing together joint projects between the countries, and governments cannot do it alone without them. When we are talking about the future of the Negev Forum, I believe that there will be a future only because of the reasons that all the countries wants it and will push forward in order to make it happen.
Ambassador Al-Otaiba, do you want to jump in? I would also be interested to hear, the Atlantic Council has been working on our N7 gatherings where we've been bringing together experts, both at the government level, but also at the civil society level to help support partnerships between countries. I wonder what role you see for not just the private sector, but also academia, civil society, NGOs, think tanks like ours in advancing greater regional integration.
So it's been argued that the Middle East is the least integrated region in the world. Secretary Kerry used to say that all the time. I think the N7 does exactly undoes that. It tries to integrate countries that didn't talk to each other. There was never a time when all those N7 countries ever got together and talk about anything, politics, security, or economics. So I think the forum itself is the right forum. And if you look at the 6 working groups from the Negev summit, 5 of them are civilian issues. Only 1 is security. But the other 5 are clean energy, education and coexistence, food and water security, health, and tourism. All of those are incredibly important. Why shouldn't the private sector have a group or a task force that puts clean energy experts together, that figures out how to deliver better or more economic clean energy for the region, for everyone in the region? Why can't researchers from the Emirates, Bahrain, and Israel find some breakthrough through technology in water security or agri-tech? These are serious, serious challenges in our region. And a lot of us have certain advantages, certain commitments, certain ways of dealing with these issues. But when we collaborate, we are able to kind of accomplish a lot more in the multilateral format. So I think the Negev has a lot of promise given the topics that we're trying to address. But it shouldn't be just government officials, like you said. It needs to be N7, it needs to be experts, it needs to be scientists, it needs to be academics. And at some point, when we make a breakthrough, those breakthroughs will ultimately benefit everyone in the region.
I want to pick up on that last piece and turn to Ambassador Khalifa and talk about benefits. Ambassador Khalifa, how do you both see the Abraham Accords as benefiting Bahrain, and how do you sell that message to Bahrainis and really to others in the region who might be considering whether or not there's a place for them in this broader regional normalization?
Thank you for the question, Camille. If you allow me to address very quickly a point regarding the Negev Forum and then move on to the benefits. In terms of the Negev Forum, it was important. The underlying message, I think, is that we needed to show that there is some sort of framework for continuity. And by creating that forum, we now have a multilateral approach to sustaining some of the achievements. But also, it's important to build upon bilateral relations. So what we did on the sidelines of the Negev Forum is sign a joint war and peace strategy. And now we have 2 tracks, one in a multilateral fora and the other one on a bilateral fora that guarantees progress. Now, ultimately, the outcomes need to touch the lives of regular people in Bahrain, in UAE, in Israel. And that's the only way that we can actually market the success of the Accords. A lot of the times we get asked the question, who's next? What country is going to get, what country is going to announce who's going to be part of it? As countries realize the success that our people are seeing out of what's coming out of the Accords, that momentum is going to create an atmosphere where countries will want to be part of the success. And I think what we're doing here is very well thought of. It's an approach where governments are working, but also creating opportunities for the private sector, creating opportunities for research centers, for think tanks, to do most of the research that is required in order for governments to adopt and hopefully move forward on some of the items on the agenda.
So I will.
I'm going to jump in because I totally agree with Sheikh Abdullah. We do get this question all the time: is who's next? I think people got excited sort of towards the end of 2020 when 4 countries normalized in 4 months. And my answer for the last 2 years has been the same. If you want to consider who's next, let's get it right with the ones who've already done it. And I think the observation that a lot of people have seen and even written about is that not only have the 4 countries kind of opened up and ran very fast with Israel, but even Jordan and Egypt now have deepened their relation with Israel on a variety of fronts. And so I think the original band members, Egypt and Jordan, are now looking at the relationship with Israel differently. And I think that's what potential countries who are considering normalize are looking at. What are the benefits? What do we get? How does it improve our stability? How does it improve our economy? How does it improve prosperity? And the more we can demonstrate those benefits, again, whether it's bilateral or multilateral, that's when people become interested.
Ambassador Hayek, do you want to jump in on that? I'm sure you're also asked this question all the time. In fact, you may be one of the people asking this question of who's next. What do you see as the future of these accords, not just in the context of, who else is joining, but also in where you can go from here?
Following my 2 friends that spoke before me, I can say that, we have 2 choices, either to be very, very successful or to be just very successful. We have no other choice. We need to bring others to the table because they will see that the train have left the station. And I believe that they should be on the train. And when I'm talking about countries, I'm not only talking about countries in the region. I'm talking about, let's talk about Europe, for example. I had a meeting with the ambassadors from the European Union here in Abu Dhabi. And they asked me the same question, who will be next? And by asking that, I asked them, why are you asking me who will be next? Why don't you bring the next country? And to bring the next country to the table, we can do it either by successful numbers and facts. And I think that we are on the right direction. But we can use tools that we have now. For example, the QIZ that Israel, the Qualified Industrial Zone that Israel have with Egypt. That's a trilateral agreement between Israel, Egypt, and the United States that allows us to manufacture together. It's 10% added value Israeli and 90% Egyptian added value, and then we can send it to United States duty-free. Now, think about clusters of QIZs, one of them in the UAE, one of them in Bahrain, one of them in Morocco, that can gain the support of the American administration and can be for the benefits of the region and make this region working together economic-wise in a much better ways. I think and I believe that, again, we should integrate the private sector in every step that we are doing. And I totally agree with what Ambassador Luteiba said, that we need research institutions as well, academia as well. We need to bring all the ingredients together in order to push forward.
Excellent. Well, I have a number of additional questions for you. I know the audience does as well. And so I would be remiss to continue to dominate. Instead, I'll hand the stage back to Ambassador Shapiro, who's been fielding those questions while we've been talking, and we'll continue to take them. Just as a reminder to those who are joining us to submit your questions through the chat function, you can also share them via Twitter. Dan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Carmiel. And we do have quite a few questions, and already there's been a very rich conversation. We have a few minutes left with Ambassador Al-Khalifa before he has a commitment that he'll need to leave for. So I'll start with you, Ambassador, but I will address a question from the audience that really applies to all of you. Each of you has referenced the importance of people-to-people connections, and that is one of the things that makes these Abraham Accords different from earlier agreements. But it's not just what has already been achieved, it's the promise of what that can achieve in terms of real societal connections. So we've seen tourism, at least flowing in one direction. We've seen the youth exchanges of various kinds, maybe some students. But I wonder if you could expand a bit on your expectations and your preferences for the right way for the UAE, Bahrain, and Israel to really drive this people-to-people phenomenon that is so central to the success of the Accords?
Thank you, Ambassador. I think that the governments have been bending backwards to ensure that there are enough people traveling back and forth, because this is a stage where people are starting to get to know one another. And with time, you find many commonalities which will hopefully pave the road for greater exchanges. And so the foundation has been laid, whether it's direct flights, it's cultural events, sports events, and even cinema. So the initiatives are in the pipeline. What will be required is a little bit more time. What we're doing is bringing the youth together on multiple platforms. Those platforms are sometimes digital, but in other times, they're actual exchanges, which is extremely important for an up and rising group that will pave the way for new policies that we will see in the region as a whole. And so the compass is pointing to the right direction. It's just a matter of getting people together. And I think the private sector plays an important role as well in making sure that we have those exchanges. We might be lacking a bit in terms of support from the private sector, but as time goes by, I'm pretty confident that we will see a better understanding of one another that will lead to further exchanges.
Thank you. Ambassador Al-Taiba, same question for you.
I think it's already happening, Dan. I see youth exchanges, student exchanges, I see sports events, I see cultural events, I see religious leaders. You know, the Abrahamic family house is being built as we speak and should be open early next year. All this is happening, and all this is happening, you know, with or without government support. So I think there's this desire, thirst for people to get to know each other. Amir mentioned 450,000 tourists since we opened the gates, and that's with COVID, and that's with flight restrictions, and that's with headwinds. So I think, you know, it's happening. We should encourage it. We should continue to advocate for it, because at the end of the day, like I said at the beginning, any relationship is built on common understanding, common respect, and knowing our values, knowing our culture, knowing our food, knowing our history, knowing our, you know, I would love to see an Israeli delegation go to an Emirati camel race or a Dow race. And I think once we have that kind of understanding of each other as people, not just as governments, not just as policies, I think that's really what builds a strong relationship.
Thank you. Ambassador Hayek, anything to add?
I totally agree with what Ambassador Al-Taiba just said. And people to people, it's very important to get to know each other, to understand each other, to respect the culture of each other. I can tell, you know, personally, I came to Abu Dhabi, and I felt that I came to my parents' neighborhood. I don't know if you know, my parents were born in Iraq, and they passed away many years ago. And when I came here, I felt that I came to the neighborhood with the food, with the language, with the culture, even with the weather that they were talking about. And I think that many Israelis that are asking me, what are you doing in Abu Dhabi? And getting the answer, I'm not going to answer you, just buy a ticket and come here. And then they are telling me two sentences. First, we came for too short. Second, we'll come again. This is what I would like to hear. Yeah. This is what I would like to see and to hear. I'm talking to Emirati friends that are visiting Tel Aviv, visiting Jerusalem, visiting the Sea of Galilee, and they are saying the same. People to people is the base of everything. People to people is something that when we will do it, we'll push forward with it, we'll get the results in any other place. We'll get the results in the trade, we'll get the results in the investment, we'll get the results in any other thing that we are aiming to. And I believe that, you know, I'll tell you something about the secret about Israelis. Israelis are early adopters of technology, but they are also early adopters of tourism. So when we open the gates, they ran into Dubai, and some of them came to Abu Dhabi, and now there are more coming to Abu Dhabi because until lately they thought that Abu Dhabi is a nickname to Dubai. And we need to let them know and understand the country. And when they are coming here, I must say that they are shocked. And they are shocked for very, very positive purposes. And let it be. We'll continue pushing for that. And we'll see more of it in the coming years.
Great. Ambassador Al-Khalif, I know you may have a commitment to leave. I want to thank you. You're obviously welcome to stay, but if you need to leave, I want to thank you for your participation.
I do apologize. This was great. I do apologize. I have to run. I'm truly honored to be speaking to a number of rabbis in a little while. But this interest has been growing with time in different societies and different communities here in the US and around the world. And I think we need to exploit every opportunity that we get. The more people understand what's happening in the region and how the mindset is shifting in the Middle East, the better it is for all of us. And thank you for creating this platform for us today.
Thanks, Ambassador.
One second, Sheikh Abdullah, before you leave.
Tell me,
ever since Sheikh Abdullah arrived in DC, I've been jealous of his wardrobe. There has not been an event where he's always the best dressed guy wherever we go, even on Zoom. But now I'm jealous of his backdrop.
I've always tried to keep up with you, Ambassador Atib.
Okay, tell us where this nice backdrop is, because now I have to go find where it is.
It's the Park Avenue Synagogue. Beautiful place. It's modern. It's open. It's inviting. And who would have imagined? I mean, I'm here. I have a colleague of mine who's a Christian Greek Orthodox. Another colleague of mine that's from Bahrain, Muslim, and we're here in a synagogue. I mean, things are shifting, and times are changing.
Thanks, Ambassador. Your presence with us and from that location signifies a lot, so we appreciate it. And we'll let you go and continue the conversation with our two other colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will turn back to Ambassador Al-Taib and Ambassador Hayek. And Carmiel had mentioned earlier the Atlantic Council's N7 initiative, and I want to acknowledge the generous support we have for that from the Jeffrey M. Talpins Foundation. The conference we held last year in Abu Dhabi, the first and only time all 7 of those countries, 6 Arab states with any form of normalization of Israel, and Israeli officials all sat at one table, and the series of conferences on specific subject matters that we will soon be holding, which will be very supportive of the Negev Working Group Forum to generate the projects and ideas that will have an impact. And so we focus a lot, and you both referenced the opportunity for a multilateral grouping to really take hold, thinking like a group, thinking like a region, being a club that others may want to join and see benefit from joining. And a lot of that discussion focused on the internal benefits, what the countries will learn from each other, trade with each other, technologies that they'll share with each other in health, energy, water, and the like, of course, education exchanges. And those are the internal benefits. But there's something about external benefits of a multilateral grouping, a region that thinks like a region, that engages the rest of the world or other actors in the world, other regions, other powers, as a group, as a bloc, that has its own kind of regional identity that they project when they have those engagements. Could both of you reflect a little on those opportunities about the sort of the external benefits to the region of acting and thinking like a region? We'll start with you, Ambassador Hayek.
I think that we will have, and we must think like a region, and if we will act like a region, all the rest of the world will treat us like a region. We have great buying power. We have great, culture that we can share with the world. I don't know if you know, but in the last few weeks, we started to see packages of tourism that are being sold in the United States to come to Israel and UAE together. And I think that this is the place, this is the right thing to do. I believe that if we will continue working and thinking like a region, we will be very strong in projects outside the region. I can mention the initiative that I'm sure Ambassador Luteba was taking part of it, the I2U2, which is very important with India. We are now cooperating with the UAE in projects. We are on the way to in projects in Africa, and as we will continue doing things together, and the companies will get to know each other and we know how the strengths of each other, we can go and be everywhere. And this is something that's very important to the region, as united region.
Thank you, Ambassador Taiba.
Yeah, so since the Abraham Accords were created 2 years ago, two multilateral groupings were created within the last, I would say, probably year or so. For you, the N7 and the Negev group, I categorize them as kind of one and the same, but also the I2U2, which really was created by accident in a dinner here at our house in DC, at a dinner between Sheikh Abdullah and Foreign Minister Lapid at the time. I think both have different strengths. I think both have different advantages. And I don't think there should be kind of a one set of rules for both, but the idea is to focus on the future, particularly on I2U2. What can we do together as four countries? What can we do together on infrastructure in Africa or Asia? Where can we bring technology to bear that can improve the region? In the Negev, we're spending a lot of time dealing with clean energy because Masdar is kind of one of the major operators in the clean energy world. So the Prosperity Project is one of possibly many more similar projects in the region. And so I think there are different advantages to both groups, but both of them are spending time thinking about how those groupings can benefit not just the countries involved, but the broader region. And we're almost 3/4 of the way through here, and we still haven't mentioned the word Palestine. And it's an elephant in the room. All the stuff that we're talking about is great, whether it's bilateral or multilateral or N7 or I2U2, but we can't avoid talking about the two-state solution. We really can't. It's, one of the biggest criticism of the Abraham Accords when it came out was, it doesn't solve the two-state solution. Well, I don't think it was meant to solve it. I think it was meant to buy space and time to create room for diplomacy to address the two-state solution. I still believe the two-state solution is the only game in town. I think we need to pursue it, but regardless of what any third party thinks, the UAE, the US, the UN, it's up to the two players. I think it's really important for us to continue advocating and pushing and encouraging that this is the only solution. We can work around the edges, we can help, we can encourage, but at the end of the day, both sides, the two key players, need to understand that this is an issue that they need to resolve together. With our help, of course, but they need to resolve it.
Well, you anticipated the next question from the audience, so I'll just pick up on that theme, and I'm glad you raised it. Even before we get to a final status kind of agreement with this regional grouping, with opportunities like the Negev Forum and N7, there are those saying that the Palestinians should be brought to that table, should find a way to contribute and to benefit from those processes that are underway. Of course, there's some resistance among Palestinians. There may be resistance among some other parties about whether that's possible or advisable. How are both of you thinking and your governments thinking about that question of bringing Palestinians to that table in a way to help move in the direction you just cited, Yusuf, but also simply to improve the lives of everybody involved?
Yeah, I don't know from the UAE side to bringing the Palestinians into the N7.
Then I think that our government is talking loud and clear and saying that there is no country in the world that would like peace with the Palestinians more than Israel. But still, we need to build trust. I don't want to get into terror attacks. I don't want to get into missiles on our children. We need to build first, we need to build trust between both sides. And I think that the matter of building and helping to improve their standard of life, I don't want to patronize anyone, but Israel can help. Israel would love to see better education, better health, better energy, better infrastructure, better water in the Palestinian side. And we need to move forward by building trust, and then we can do other things with the Palestinians. About bringing them to the table, you know, we are welcoming anyone to the table, and I can say that you know, the relations in the region, it's not zero-sum game. That if we will add, let's say, I don't know, any other country, we will lose. No, if we will add more participants to this table, I think that we can do more and we can gain more, all of us.
Thank you both for those comments. And of course, there's something else happening in the region and in your country, Amir, that obviously no one can avoid thinking about. Yusuf, you mentioned you've already worked with 2 Israeli governments. There's another Israeli election underway, the 5th in the last 3 years. What are the prospects for the Abraham Accords during an election season? After the next government takes office, whoever leads that government, whoever's in that government, how do your government, Yusuf, think about working with the different parties in Israel? And Amir, how is the policy going to be the same or going to change depending on what kind of government Israel has?
Maybe I will start, and then Yusuf can reply, because I can tell you, in Israel you can find opposition to anything. But to Abraham Accords, we have a coalition of maybe all the members of the Israeli Knesset, the Israeli Parliament, that support the Abraham Accords. We think that the Abraham Accords is one of the best things that happened, and I didn't hear anyone from the Israeli politicians, and I'm talking to all of them from all the parties, that think that the Abraham Accord is something that we need to stop, we need to not to continue to the direction that we are going to. This is why I think that no matter what government will be in Israel, the next government and the one after will support and continue supporting the Abraham Accords.
Yeah. I defer to Amir, but I also agree with him. So I've been in Washington now, as Dan knows, 14 years. So this is my 4th US administration. And in the 2 years since the Abraham Accords, I've dealt with 2 Israeli governments now in 2 years. And what I find in common on both sides is that the Abraham Accords are incredibly well supported from both sides in 2 very polarized political spectrums in 2022. Both sides agree that the Abraham Accords are good for the countries that have signed them, are good for the region, and are good for the United States. So I'm not worried about lack of support from a future Israeli government. I'm not worried about that. But I think what we are doing, or the approach that we're taking, is the right approach, where we are setting priorities, we are setting objectives, we are setting sectors that we need to focus on. And I think those sectors and those priorities are going to continue to be the same no matter which government comes in. I don't see any Israeli government coming in and say, you know what, education and coexistence, not that important.
We don't like water. We don't like water. We don't like energy.
So I think the priorities that we've set that we're working on are going to endure no matter who wins. But we're just going to sit and wait and see the results of November 1st in Israel and the results of November 8th in Washington and see what happens.
Very good. Shifting gears a bit, a question on security. So much of this discussion about the Abraham Accords is around the people-to-people aspects of the relationship, the energy, the water, the health, the trade aspects of the relationship. And yet it was already true that there were a lot of security synergies between your 2 countries and Israel and several other Arab countries who have shared common threats from Iran and elsewhere. But something happened around the same time of the Abraham Accords, or the same general period of time, which was Israel joining CENTCOM's area of responsibility, the U.S. Central Command that is responsible for U.S. military activity in the Middle East. And that seems to also be part of this story on the security side. And so I'm interested in both of you reflecting what is now possible that maybe is new and was not possible before by these 2 streams kind of converging. Normalization of relations and everything that brings in the government and people to space, and a deeper kind of connection on security partnerships as well. Yusuf, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it opens the aperture of the things that we couldn't do or were restricted in doing prior to Israel joining CENTCOM, which is exercises, training, intelligence sharing, things like that. Now we're talking about, air defense systems. Look, I've been hearing about, a regional air defense system since Secretary Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. It has been sort of this goal that everybody has been aspiring to for many, many years. I think this just makes it easier. My advice has always been, you don't have to take it or leave it for the entire group or the entire GCC or the entire whatever pre-existing regional organization that exists. I think whoever wants to join up and partner on air defense cooperation or a counter drone cooperation or, intelligence sharing can sign up, and whoever wants to opt out can opt out. But I think it creates a much wider highway avenue that we can all cooperate on for those who choose to.
Amir?
It don't happen to me a lot, but I have nothing to add to what Yusuf just said.
Okay, we can continue. Another question which touches something that was raised earlier, which is how to engage other partners in supporting the processes underway by the Abraham Accords. You mentioned, Amir, that you spoke to European ambassadors and asked for them to get more involved. And I think this is a really interesting question. The U.S. has been the lead partner, of course, as signified by the signing ceremony on the White House lawn, by Secretary Blinken's attendance at the Negev Summit. We know that the U.S. is the key partner, and we at the Atlantic Council, at least I'll speak for myself, think that's a good thing, and we want to continue to see it that way. But there's opportunities for Europeans, for India has been mentioned in the I2U2, for Australia, Japan, Korea. We also have to think about how Russia and China relate to this regional grouping. What are the opportunities that are still not fully been realized? And our untapped potential for other regions and other powers to engage with this regional grouping. Amir, why don't we start with you?
As I said before, we have two options, either to be very, very, very successful or to be very successful. As much as we will be more successful, more countries would like to take part of what we are doing here. And I don't see, it's not a secret that the United States is the best and the ally of Israel all over the world for many years. I don't see that any reason that someone will say, I don't want the Europeans getting involved or other countries getting involved. We are doing good thing to the region and to the world. And anyone that can join and push forward and bring more countries and can take a part of what we are doing here, blessed. And again, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not that if we will add more countries and more involvement, we will lose. No. If we will add more, we'll have more to everyone. And I think that the region, as much as we will act as a region, will attract many other regions in the world that will want to come and cooperate with. And this is what will happen. This is what I expect that will happen.
Yeah. On this, I totally agree with Amir, and it's the more the merrier then. But it's not just governments. It's not just the new government in the UK or President Macron. It's also European companies. Why doesn't the European private sector figure out how to benefit from the Abraham Accords? Why aren't they creating incubators or investment firms going in and looking into it? So I would encourage not just the governments, also the private sector in Europe to look at it. What are the possibilities that didn't exist until 2 years ago?
Mm-hmm. Great, and I'll close with one last question. It's not a downer, but it's a realism. We always think about the opportunities. We've been speaking about them, but we also think about the challenges. What's the concern you have? What could become a challenge to fully realizing the potential of the Abraham Accords? What do we have to watch out for and do the work to avoid tripping over? Yusuf, start with you.
For me, it's always politicization. When you take an issue like the Abraham Accords that is incredibly popular, that is bipartisan, and we over-politicize it, that's one of the risks. I think the other risk is bureaucracy and just, treating this as some ordinary accomplishment, and then we just kind of push it at the bureaucratic level without any sort of senior advocacy and pushing. And like, I've been in government for a long time. If you don't push, nothing happens. If you don't take the initiative, nothing happens. Things don't happen on their own in our world. And so I don't want us to lose the momentum, or for this to become sort of, oh, it's okay, there, you know, it's going to happen on its own. So complacency and bureaucracy, politicization, and, you know, again, 2 elections in Israel in 2 years. I hope that's not something we have to go through every single year or so. I would like to see some consistency, and I would like to see some high-level advocacy of making these types of things happen.
Amir?
Of course, I mentioned the two-state solution, the Palestinian issue. To me, that's the biggest risk.
I think that what we need to be afraid of is, you know, counting handshakes instead of counting results. And we need to set KPIs. So when Yusuf will say we succeeded, I will agree with him on the same base of KPIs. So this is one thing that I think all the countries in the region should put to themselves and agreed on. And another thing, very important challenge is building trust. You know, we are running forward very fast, but still it's not the speed that I would like to see. I think that we can do more, and we will do it only if we'll have more trust between the parties. And we can bring more countries, even if we'll have trust between the countries. And this is something very basic that we should work on. And of course, you know, Yusuf spoke about the bureaucracy, and I agree. And we are looking at it, and I can tell that we can find bureaucracy in both sides.
All of us are grizzled veterans of government bureaucracy, and we know its gifts, and we know its challenges. But those are good reminders of that the work to fully capitalize on the opportunities presented doesn't happen by itself. Takes focus, takes consistency, and should not be allowed to drift. Notwithstanding a reference to challenges, which is always something to look at with eyes wide open, I think we should all agree that what was launched 2 years ago has been a tremendous success, opens up huge possibilities for further successes. The future is bright, whether you're looking from the top of the Burj Khalifa or from the cliffs of Masada. I think we can all agree that the Abraham Accords 2 years hence give us many, many opportunities. We at the Atlantic Council will be continuing to partner with your governments, with the U.S. government and others to try to take full advantage of them. So I want to thank our guests, Ambassador Yusuf El-Taiba, Ambassador Amir Hayek, Ambassador Sheikh Abdullah Rashid bin Al Khalifa of Bahrain. I want to thank my colleague, Carmiel Arbit, and thank Dr. Ahmed Shirai for his opening remarks. And I want to thank our audience for being with us and marking this very important occasion. We look forward to having you with us again in the future.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.